All right, let's get started. So tonight's meditation talk is on the question and challenge of the week, and they're at least tangentially related, but I'm going to kind of try to weave them together in a way that makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then you can just pretend it never happened. So the question of the week is on avoidance. It is, what are you avoiding? And this is one of my favorite questions from last year when we did it the first time, and we still had students in the dojo when we did it then, and I asked, and I looked, and a couple of people's faces just went like, and something comes to mind for many of you when I ask you, what are you avoiding? You know exactly what you're avoiding, or you at least know the one biggest, most present thing that you're avoiding. And those are things that, of course, you should deal with. The question of the week is more about discovery than action, but you guys should be thinking about that. But also recognize, what is it that you're avoiding that you're not quite as aware about? What is more subtle? And these are the things that through meditation, through mindfulness, through just kind of spending some time on our own in silence, we become more aware of. These are things that for most people, they just would spend their entire lives avoiding without even being aware that it's going on. And this is not what we want. We want to be totally aware of what's going on and then to be able to choose what to do with it. So one thing that many people know right off the top of their head, as soon as I say, what are you avoiding? They know that they're avoiding some kind of confrontation. And this is for people like me and like many of you who I'm sure are by nature a little bit less confrontational. If you are a more confrontational person, then maybe you're never avoiding your confrontations at all. And this is where I have in my own practice found a nicer balance, where I used to be just totally afraid of having confrontational conversations. I was just always so interested in people liking me, and I started to realize that confrontation is kind of like sparring. Sparring in the beginning is scary. And look, there is nobody on the planet who likes getting punched in the face. Maybe there's a couple people, but most people don't like getting punched in the face. And I would even say that most people don't like punching other people in the face. And I was certainly that way on both of those. When I started martial arts and sparring, I did not like getting punched, and I did not like punching other people. But after I did it for a while, and this was something that we obviously do in the dojo in a way that's safe, and we're kind of adding more intensity as we go and as people get used to it. You can do it without seriously getting hurt or hurting your partner. Then it starts to become enjoyable, and it's not only because you get better at it. It gets enjoyable because you get that it is kind of like a game that you're playing, and it is not a game in as much as you're thinking like it's me versus my partner and me trying to win. It's a game that you're playing with yourself, where you are really completely in the moment and playing with energy. And it's not about I'm losing and I'm terrible, and it's not about I'm winning and I'm amazing. It is really just playing with that energy. And so sparring, when it gets to that level, even though it is to the beginner's view very confrontational and very scary and very uncomfortable, to somebody who's done it is really enjoyable. And in fact, you'll see people at a high level get hit and then really enjoy it and say wow, that was amazing, that strike was so good, your energy was so perfect. And we want to be able to do that ourselves. We want to be able to take that same kind of attitude into everyday life and into something like a confrontational conversation, and something that might be relating to where we need to forgive somebody. So this is the challenge of the week. The challenge of the week is to forgive somebody for something that they did that you got upset about. And forgiveness is something that most people are just terrible at. We don't like forgiving each other. We don't like forgiving ourselves. We don't like forgiving other people. We love to hold on to stuff because stuff is Stuff is how we relate to, the world, or basically this is all about the ego, and I'm going to try not to go too far down this rabbit hole, but our ego is all about, connecting these memories and having this whole basically story of, this happened and this happened, this happened, and this is how we create our sense of self, is by holding on to, by staying attached to these things that happened. And forgiveness is the opposite of that. Forgiveness is, I'm actually able to completely let go of this stuff that happened. And forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And there are certainly things that we should not forget. There are many things that we should not forget. But just because you are remembering what happened in the past and being able to avoid letting it happen again in the future does not mean that you're unable to forgive. And the real functional difference here is basically how much time are you spending thinking about this thing. If you're thinking about it at a time where it is beneficial to remember what happened last time, for example, if in the past you walked into the street and got hit by a car, the next time you walk up to the street, you should remember that and not walk into the street when there are cars coming by. But if you spend all of your time thinking about how you got hit by the car, well, it's not really serving you very well in all of the times where there's no street and there's no actual danger of the car coming by, right? This is one of the fundamental flaws of our design, is that we really hold on to this stuff that is in this moment not really helpful for us. And so forgiveness is like, if you have been holding on to, getting hit by a car is kind of a silly example, but let's use this. Let's use you get punched in sparring, because this is probably, I hope, more likely to happen to you, but also I hope someday less likely to happen to you. In any case, you're going to get punched if you spar. And when that happens, you should remember why it happened, and the why it happened is almost guaranteed not because your partner hates you and wants you to experience pain, or even that your partner is really trying to be better than you and show you who's boss. It happened because you bowed in, and in that moment you dropped your hand, or you moved the wrong way, or your partner was just too fast for you. And it doesn't actually mean anything beyond that. So if we truly realize why things happened, then the next time we bow in with that same partner, instead of dragging what happened in the past into this and thinking, yeah, this, I'm going to use Doug as an example because he's really nice, but he can also be really, challenging as a partner. And if I'm thinking, oh, the last time I sparred with Doug, he punched me in the face, and then as soon as I bow in, then I'm doing this kind of thing, like whenever we start moving around. And you guys have experienced this in sparring. If you get hit once, then for the immediate future after that, you're kind of doing this. But that is really a sign that you are still attached to that, and you're actually being stopped by and dragged down by that. So we can remember what happened. We can remember, oh yeah, the last time what happened was my hands were down here, so I need to have my hands up here. But I can still forgive Doug for punching me in the face. In fact, in sparring, if you're doing it properly, you forgive that person immediately, because it has nothing to do with anything other than there was a punch and I dropped my hands. I was talking to Catherine about this earlier today, and she said, Miss Macy said, Sifu, I'm really struggling with this challenge of the week. And I said, tell me about that. I love it when somebody's really struggling with the challenge of the week, because that's what it's for. It's there to challenge us and push us. And she said, well, I'm just really struggling finding things to forgive people for, because I don't think I have anything left. I think I've already forgiven everybody for everything. And that's really nice to hear, and I think that is something that most people cannot relate to. But if you are getting really good at martial arts, you are getting really good at practicing an instant forgiveness, an instant letting go of what happened, or at least letting go of all of those stories that we tell ourselves in our minds, right? So the story that we get stuck on is when we add extra meaning to this, and it was like, yeah, Doug punched me in the face and he's always had it out for me. Every time I see him in class, I can tell he's got that look in his eye like he just wants to punch me in the face. And like all of this stuff that we build up in our heads, all that nonsense is what there is for us to let go of in the moment and forgive. So if you get punched and then you immediately let that go and move on to the next moment, you are really practicing, you're honing your consciousness and your ability to let go and move on. If you are truly living in the moment, you are going to be unable to do that if you have something that is unforgiven, something that you're stuck on. So this forgiveness is a practice ultimately of being in the present and not being stuck in the past, and not being stuck in our stories, and not being stuck on all of that stuff that we make up. So avoidance, if we go back to the sparring metaphor, you should be avoiding getting hit, and you should be avoiding, hurting your partner. There are plenty of things in life that we should avoid. You should be avoiding being closer than 6 feet to anybody you're not living with right now. You should be avoiding anybody who's coughing and looks sick. You should be avoiding just touching your face all the time. And those are real useful things to avoid. Just like avoiding getting punched in the face is a very useful thing to avoid. Just like avoiding walking out into traffic is a very useful thing to avoid. The problem is that we end up getting so stuck on things, and we're always, thinking about avoiding things that we don't actually need to avoid. So if you are, again, like most people who are really afraid of confrontation, a conversation about forgiveness is oftentimes something that you are avoiding. And so you can kill two birds with one stone this week. If you've been avoiding forgiving somebody, then you can just do that. Boom, it's all done. Then you can just, hang out for the rest of the week. But remember that forgiveness is not really for the other person. So we might have in our mind the way that this conversation has to go, and we're really avoiding it because we're worried about maybe bringing this other person into our life. Somebody was asking about this, like, what if there's somebody that I have forgiven, but I don't want to forgive them, tell them about it, because then I'm inviting them back into my life and making contact that I don't think is going to be helpful. In fact, it might actually drag me back down into that situation. So first of all, I would say that if that is a real fear, it's likely that you haven't fully forgiven, or it's likely that there is still something that you are caught up on. If you are afraid of being in contact with this person, if you're afraid of that conversation, it means that you haven't really forgiven that person, or maybe you haven't really forgiven yourself. This is what happens oftentimes, is these things that we are unable to forgive other people for. It's because these are things that we have not forgiven in ourselves. And these may be things that we're avoiding thinking about completely. So, as I've been saying earlier on in the week, one of the first best steps in forgiveness is to empathize with that other person and understand, why did they do what they did. This is all about being a great partner in martial arts. If you are able to put yourself in your partner's shoes and actually see things from their point of view, and really put yourself in their circumstances and understand what they need as a senior student or even as a junior student, you will be a much better partner. Maybe your partner needs you to go harder and challenge them more today. Maybe your partner needs to slow it down a little bit. Maybe your partner needs you to throw a certain attack or whatever. But putting yourself over there where that person is and really fully understanding them means that it's going to be almost impossible, I'm sorry to say, to hold that grudge and to stop yourself from forgiving them. Because if you can truly understand that person, then you will completely realize that you've probably done something just like that in the past, and you understand why you did what you did. But if you haven't forgiven yourself for it, then of course you're not going to forgive the other person for it. So forgiveness is for ourselves in that way. It kind of points us into the mirror and makes us realize, what am I holding on to that I really feel like I messed up on and I haven't forgiven myself and moved on for or from. But then forgiveness is also about us and for ourselves in the same way that I was just mentioning. Like, it is for us to be able to move on and for us to not be stuck in the past. So this is the point where I'm going to talk about some tougher stuff. There are things that are happening in the world today, and things certainly that have happened in the past, that we should find it very difficult to forgive, and that we certainly should not forget. But a few people have asked me about, what if this thing is so egregious that you don't want to forgive them, that you do not want to move past this? And I'll say, like, for me and a lot of people, the recent stuff with the police in Minnesota, and before that, where, and this is just one of many terrible things, but this is one that I'm really spending a lot of time thinking about. There are things that we should get angry about, and there are things that we might recognize that being angry and not forgiving, but kind of really feeling that, what that does is it spurs us into action. And I'm not trying to get too political about this at all, because I don't want to do that. But for example, there are people who are rioting in response to the killing in Minnesota by a police officer of a man, and there are people who say that rioting is totally understandable, and I can get why people who are very angry are showing their anger, and I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't do that, because it's not really my place. What I will say is that we got to be careful with acting out of anger instead of tweaking that slightly, which is to be angry about something and realize that this means something must be done. There is a real transformation that has to happen in this country. And then instead of going out and immediately doing the first thing that we think of, spend at least a moment and think about what should be done, what should we do. And this is like C.P. Brown likes to talk about this idea of stimulus and response. And if you are a prisoner of your reactions, something happens and you have an emotional response and you immediately react to it. You are a prisoner, and you are a prisoner in the very real sense, just as much as if somebody were actually physically imprisoning you. Because if you can't choose what you're doing, then you may as well just be a puppet. Somebody else is moving you around, or something else is locking you in a cage and stopping you from being able to do what you truly want to do. So instead of being a prisoner of our reactions, we want to be a master of our actions. to be a master of our actions, we have to put a little bit of pause in there between stimulus and response. So it's stimulus, pause, response. And that pause should not be years. It should not be like, well, somebody's going to take care of this someday. It's like something might need to get done today, now. But rather than flying off the handle and resorting to violence, we decide, like, what is it that really will get us the result that we want? And it might be violence. In self-defense, sometimes when somebody is committing violence against you, sometimes you need to commit violence against them immediately in order to stop them from doing this. And that is a very small portion or percentage of the time. Actually, the vast majority of the time when somebody is hurting you or trying to hurt you, you can just turn and run. Or you can, before it gets to that point, you can talk your way out of it. But I'm not trying to say that there's never a time for violence, because sometimes that is the only way to stop something from happening. And I hope nobody just edits this talk, because they could get me to say pretty much anything they want me to say if they edited this in the right way. But what I'm trying to get at here is that there are things that we might feel very emotional about and very personal about. And we should not stuff that away and pretend that nothing is happening. We should not repress our emotions. And to allow that emotional state to kind of spur us into action immediately without knowing what we're doing and deciding or acting well, responding well, is like we are being imprisoned. So we got to recognize that. There are going to be things that happen to us or to people who we love and really care about that we might find it actually within our lives it's impossible to forgive this person. And what I would love for all of us to be able to do is to have the ability to forgive under any circumstances. And I recognize that practically speaking, that might not be available for all of us, but we want to try. We want to try to work with ourselves and get to a place where we are actually fully able to forgive the most egregious acts against us. Because if this terrible thing happens to us and then we hold on to it for the rest of our lives and we are unable to move on from it, then that is in many ways much worse than the actual act itself. So we work on the capacity to forgive, the ability to forgive. And I believe that if we are in our highest state, if we are really connected to our highest selves, in any moment, forgiveness happens like that. Like Miss Macy was talking about. It's like I'm having a hard time finding people to forgive because as soon as something happens, it's just there. I've forgiven them. And we are, as somebody was asking earlier in class today, if we are living in duality, we are still in this ego mind, and the ego does not forgive easily. In fact, the ego hardly ever forgives. But we can recognize that the act of forgiveness is very much tied to the act of moving beyond the ego, transcendence, because forgiveness, again, on a very real level, is about understanding that other person. And if we are stuck up here and we are only able to see things from our point of view and we are unable to understand the other point of view, then we are unable to forgive, we are unable to transcend our small self. So the better we get at being a great partner, the better we get at being able to let go of our ego mind and be connected to that bigger self. And the one of the very first steps in being able to do that is just to empathize with one other person. And it's very easy to empathize with somebody who's very similar to us, to somebody who's acting in a way that we're totally, in accordance with. It's another thing to forgive somebody who's acting in a way that you don't like at all. It's another thing to empathize with that person. But if we practice, sometimes this is just the work. The work is retraining our minds, retraining ourselves, the ego, to on a logical level, from a methodical sense, being able to put ourselves in the other person's shoe and recognize what they're going through and recognize why they did what they did, but also methodically and constantly going back to this place of letting go of the ego and empathizing with that person on a more real kind of emotional level rather than just logical. If we can do that on a regular basis, then we can get to the point where it just kind of becomes automatic. So we're doing the work, but then someday the work has been done to the point where it just happens. Sifu Brown said, this was many years ago, our school back in Michigan was one of the biggest adult martial arts schools in the entire country for traditional martial art, and people were calling him and saying, like, this is an incredible overnight success. It's like, we didn't even know who you were just a couple months ago, and now, wow, you have so many students. And Sifu Brown said, in his experience, an overnight success usually takes about 10 years. So the dojo had been open for 10 years, and then just through the work, just continuing, it's like a flywheel. A flywheel is this giant stone wheel. I believe it's made out of stone. It's so heavy, and then you're just kind of pushing it slowly and slowly and slowly, and it picks up. I imagine like the Price is Right wheel, but it's super heavy, and you can't just actually yank it like that. You got to go like, and you keep working at it, and eventually then it picks up this momentum, and it's going and it's going, and that process and certain things takes a decade or more. And so when we are working on something that is so fundamentally difficult for us, like being able to forgive and move beyond and not get stuck, that might take a very long time. And then at some point, we'll just surprise ourselves. We'll wake up one day and we'll be like, hey, it's been a long time since I've been really like pissed off at somebody and just held on to it. It just rolls right off my back now. So, some of that was conflicting, and I understand, but do your best with it. The main crux of this is: are we avoiding forgiving ourselves or somebody else for something? Are we avoiding thinking of this in a way? Are we avoiding being in a way that truly allows us to move on and to be in the present? The present moment is probably the most avoided thing of all, because for some people it's boring, for some people it's painful, we don't like being alone with our thoughts or whatever, but to truly be in the present is very difficult for many people, and it does require forgiveness. It does require the ability to let go of and move on. And we can forgive without forgetting. We can recognize the emotion that goes along with this and allow it to give us energy, but then also create enough of a pause so that we act in a way or respond in a way that we know that we're going to be proud of later on if we look back at this from our higher state. And this is why I think it's so important to be in our higher state and make decisions and stick to them even when we are not in our highest state. But you can almost guarantee that if you are forgiving, then you are connected to or being in that higher place. So how do we get there? Meditation, better awareness of our own thoughts, of our own emotions, and that also leads us to greater empathy, to be able to connect with somebody else that takes what was this small thing and at least expands it and doubles it. It's not just me, it's me and somebody else, and what are we together? And as soon as you've broken down that wall between you and one other person, then it becomes easier to break down that wall between you and many other people. And then eventually we want to be able to break down that wall between us and anything and everything. So this is what the oneness is total forgiveness, total being in the present right now, where we are not stuck on anything. And we might experience this in meditation, we might experience this practicing martial arts, we might experience this in a great relationship, but this is what we're looking for. So as you sit tonight, recognize that you're not just sitting for yourself. You are sitting for your ability to be with other people, and you're sitting for kind of the consciousness and the progress of the entire world. We need it right now. Sit comfortably.